Hey folks, this week we talk with Nate Graham, one of the institutions over at KDE. He runs the Pointed Stick blog, and we end up talking about him quite a bit when it comes to KDE things. He's got thoughts on where we've come from, where we're going, and what the next niche is where KDE and Linux might really fit. It's a lot of fun and you don't want to miss it, so stay tuned. This is Floss Weekly, episode 835, recorded Tuesday, June the 3rd. Board Member B. It's time for Floss Weekly. It's a show about free, Libre, and open source software. I'm your host, Jonathan Bennett, and today's going to be a lot of fun. We're gonna talk about something that I care a lot about, and something that our co-host today, every once in a while, throws a little shade on. So my goal for the day is by the end of the show, hit the right button there. My goal for the day is that by the end of the show, Rob will convert and be willing to run KDE on his machines. What do you think, Rob?
I think that's maybe a little unfair. Maybe sure I do throw a little shade that it looks a little like Windows by default. But I was a KDE user over 20 years ago. I'm just over the last couple of years been giving GNOME a fair shot and giving it a chance the last couple of years. But maybe it's time to come back to KDE. Let's see if you can convince me.
Yeah, we're definitely going to try. Yeah. So today's guest, we've got Mr. Nate Graham of KDE, of Pointed Stick, of Paladin software. You have a lot of things going on, Nate.
I do, yeah. At the moment, that is the case. Well, thanks a lot for inviting me on the show.
Yeah,
I
welcome.
appreciate it.
We are super glad to have you.
It's nice to be here, and it sounds like I've got quite a challenge set out for me today.
So for those small handful of people that listen to the show and don't know what KDE is, or maybe even how you're connected with it, what is sort of the overview here? What is KDE, and why does Nate Graham? Why do we care what Nate Graham thinks about it?
Sure. Well, the short version is that you should definitely not care about what I say just because of who I am. Hopefully what I say is actually even remotely interesting. But for anybody who does care about that, I'm Nate Graham. I've been volunteering with KDE for about 8 years now, following my departure from the Apple world. And I think KDE is pretty awesome. I've done a whole lot of things since then. I've been 2 gold champions for KDE's elected goals. I was elected to the board of directors a few years ago, and I currently co-own and am the CEO of a small business consultancy called Paladin Software, where we focus on working on KDE software for clients. And currently our biggest client is Valve, so that's pretty cool. In terms of what KDE is one of the oldest and most storied free software organizations in existence, predating GNOME. I will have to mention her briefly. And KDE started as just a desktop environment and eventually branched out into other things too. Now KDE is the name of the organization, and the desktop environment continues under the name Plasma. KDE has accumulated a whole bunch of professional caliber apps over the years. Some people might have heard of. One is Krita, which is a professional caliber painting suite. Another one is Kdenlive, which is a nonlinear video editor. We've also got K-Stars for astronomy, which can power the biggest telescopes in the world, and apparently does for some of them. We've got Ocular and Cleopatra, which are document and encryption management software, respectively, which are used professionally by many organizations that you might have heard of, including NATO, which is one that I imagine many viewers have heard of. So KDE is a big organization in the world of free software, and we've kind of grown up over the years. What started in many ways as sort of a small hacker thing is now an absolutely huge organization that provides software to tons and tons of people throughout the world.
Yeah, very cool. So I use Kdenlive to edit this show, among other things. So the desktop behind me runs Fedora with KDE, and I am convinced I'm a user. Rob, we're getting there.
Well, not mentioned in that list, but back in the day when optical media was a much bigger thing. K3B K3B was one of my
K3B.
favorite.
Yeah.
My favorite
Yep.
software.
Yep.
It's still around.
Oh yeah. Tell me more about this this departure from Apple. I'm very curious about this.
Yeah. So I'll have to rewind the clock a little bit and go back in my own history to provide just a brief bit of background. But as a kid, I was a huge, massive Apple fan. I loved how easy and usable Apple's computers were, and I loved how they were kind of pitched at creative people. And it just kind of clicked with me. And so I decided when I was younger that I wanted to make working for Apple a personal goal. And eventually I managed to achieve that. And I got a job at Apple, and I worked there as a build and integration engineer for about 7 years. And you've probably heard the saying, don't work at the sausage factory if you want to continue to enjoy sausage, right? And to make a very long story short, I eventually came to appreciate the saying, and eventually left Apple in 2016 and decided that that was the moment for me to go whole hog on free software. I'd used Linux before. I was at Apple. I ran a small company that sold 3D printer parts. That company also bore the name Tech Paladin. Back then, it was Tech Paladin Printing. But I had a small print farm. And in those days, 3D printers were serial connected only. And they basically just didn't work on Macs. For drivers did not support this very well. And so I got a PC and I threw Linux Mint on it, and I used that to run the print farm. And over the course of about 2 years, slowly the Linux Mint PC that ran the print farm started to take over more and more and more and more of the everyday computing, as I realized, wait, this Linux thing is actually really good and really competitive. That was back in 2011, I believe. And I wasn't ready to fully ditch Apple back then, but this was sort of my first taste in the world of free software, having arrived there from the circuitous path of free hardware in the form of 3D printers, which back then were all like hacker-made things. I don't know if anybody remembers the RepRap project. Maybe this audience will remember them, but I was really into RepRaps back then, and I built a whole bunch of 3D printers and made them into a print farm and ran them on Linux. So that continued for a couple of years. And eventually in 2016, when I was ready to leave Apple, I dug into that experience of mine and I said, I bet this thing is actually ready. And I said, my new life goal is to make Linux and free software in general take over the entire world. So everybody can be free of proprietary software, and we can just all have software that's like good, how it was supposed to be, how it was promised, and we won't have any of this junk that we're stuck with today with nagware and adware and everything's in the cloud and you rent everything. I mean, this is not the way stuff was supposed to be, in my opinion. And so after my departure from Apple, I decided this was going to be my thing. I shopped around a little bit. I started in GNOME. But I found that their UI vision, while it was very Apple-like in some ways, it was a little bit inflexible for me. And I found that some of my ideas were not considered to be very interesting. And so I said, okay, well, there goes one of the big projects that I've actually heard of. I'm going to try another one, KDE. And the KDE people were very receptive to my ideas and my bug reports and my patches. And when I looked at the state of KDE software in 2016, my own assessment was the bones are pretty good, but the presentation is really, really, really rough and needs a lot of work. And I told myself it's probably going to be easier to help out with the presentation than to fix the bones. And that was a personal assessment because I'm sort of more of a front-end UI guy than like a back-end algorithmic code guy. And it turns out KDE was receptive to my ideas to help it look better and present better and be a bit more usable. So I've stuck around, and that's where I've been since then.
Do you have a technical title inside KDE? Like, are you the lead of anything, or are you just that guy that hangs out and does stuff?
Well, so KDE is like, another interesting thing about KDE is it really is kind of like an anarchist community. People come in, they volunteer their time and work on what they want to work on. And when they get tired of that, they stop. I could probably give myself all sorts of titles. I think probably the only actual official KDE title I have at the moment is board member. I believe I'm board member B, or maybe board member A. Maybe not the most glamorous sounding title, but I would not call myself like the lead of anything. When it comes to volunteering, I pretty much just try to work on what I feel like I have the ability to work on and get involved in projects that I think are important. I guess in terms of titles, in the past, I've been a goal champion. That was the official title for people who were leading these elected goals. The first one was in 2018. I believe it started in 2018. That was my usability and productivity goal. Then later, I proposed another one, and from I think 2021 onwards, I did the automation and systematization goal. And then I decided to give it a rest this time because I'd already been gold champion twice, and I was ready to do some other things. But yeah, I guess you could say that I've worn a lot of hats in KDE. I've had various titles. But, I mean, to me, the titles are not very important. What matters to me is that the forward momentum in the project and that things that need to get improved so that we can strategically advance the state of the software so that more people can use it do actually get done. So that's my North Star, is sort of always trying to zoom out, see the big picture, and see how can we improve adoption of this across more individual people and more target user groups. I mentioned Krita before, and there's Kden Live. So we're currently doing a big push for digital artists right now to make KDE Plasma a really great environment for people doing digital art. So to that end, we've worked a whole lot on color calibration, color management, stylus, and pen and tablet stuff recently. This has just been a huge focus over the last year. And that's just building on top of the existing creative software that we've got, which I mentioned before. So that's one. Then, of course, there's the Steam Deck, which is aggressively targeting gamers. This is also a huge demographic, a really strategically important one, too, because gamers are one of the groups of people that still actually use computers and have not just switched everything to phones and tablets and stuff. So, you know, these are people who appreciate like having a giant box with lots of power in their desk. And so I think the Steam Deck has been a really great gateway drug. Of course, the Steam Deck is shipped with KDE Plasma as its default desktop environment in desktop mode. So, you know, when I sort of zoom out and pull out my crystal ball and I look at the state of the world, I see us systematically targeting specific user groups that we can make the experience great for. And I think the more we do that, the more things start to snowball.
Yeah, interesting. Have you completed the circle of coming from Apple and now at KDE? Have you bought one of the M-powered MacBooks and put Asahi Linux on it and run KDE?
Not. I have not managed to do this. I haven't really had much interest. You know, from a functional perspective, I probably should, because of one of my other great passions in life is trying to find a quality laptop. When I left Apple, I honestly found the software side to be not too hard. There were some omissions, some things were better. I found replacements for something, it was easy. The hardware I found really challenging because I'm one of those weird people who likes to have only one computer. So I don't have to deal with like file syncing conflicts and managing multiple pieces of hardware. And of course, if it's going to be one computer, it has to be a laptop. And in most ways, Apple laptops are like 5 years ahead of PC laptops. The gap has shortened a little bit recently, but for a very long time, it was really hard for me to find a PC laptop that I was able to really feel like it was actually as good as what I was using before. And so in a lot of ways, maybe I probably should get one of these amazing, you know, Apple Silicon MacBooks, but I don't know. To be honest, I'm still a little bit salty about the whole thing. So I have some emotional reasons for sticking with PC manufacturers at this point in time, despite the fact that there are always some compromises there.
That's fair. Okay, so you've got Tech Paladin, right? That's the name of the new company. What is that about? Obviously you're doing KDE work, but like one of the things that we end up talking a lot about on the show is taking open source and like making it make sense for businesses, making it make sense to be able to actually make money and pay your rent off of it. And so this is a story I'm super curious about it.
So The basic outline there is if you want to make money, there has to be money. I think in the open source world, in many cases, we haven't focused too much on the income side, which of course means that people are poor and have to stay volunteers. And what Valve has been doing with the Steam Deck is they picked up a ton of open source and free software, and they've been putting money into it to make it better because they recognize that there's actually a business use case for this. And so that's why I think it's so important for us to focus on pre-installation on hardware. So the story behind Tech Paladin is that for a number of years, there was no Tech Paladin, and instead there was a company in KDE's orbit called Blue Systems. And Blue Systems was responsible for doing this work. And a number of months ago, and I was working for Blue Systems along with a whole bunch of other people. A number of months ago, the owner of Blue Systems asked me if I wanted to essentially take over this work because he wanted to make a strategic pivot and move Blue Systems out of the business of being a consultancy, essentially.
Sure.
And he, didn't want to hand it off to somebody else, so I offer and decided to take this and rehired pretty much all of my colleagues in Blue Systems who were doing work on Valve. So from an internal perspective, very little actually changed. It's, the same group of people doing the same work for the same client, but now we're in within the umbrella of a legal organization that's actually owned collectively by us. We're very, very KDE focused. So, not a lot functionally changed, but it was like the sort of the legal stuff that ended up changing.
Yeah. I went through one of those myself here not too very long ago. Okay, what can you tell us about the work for Valve? I'm assuming some of this is secret squirrel, but hopefully there's some of it that you can shed some light on. Like what is Valve having you guys?
Yeah, I mean,
on?
some of it is, but Valve has been really good about sponsoring work that's in the open. So ultimately, most of the stuff that they do and pretty much everything that we do ends up public. Mm-hmm. So, you can kind of piece together the pieces there if you want to, but they're obviously very interested in compositor performance, gaming performance, anything performance related, but there's also top stuff because not only is the Steam Deck shipped on the deck, but a lot of these folks use KDE software on their workstations. And so there's often beyond the sort of expected gaming focused stuff, there is a mix of topics that range from Steam Deck specific things to, fix this bug because we're having this problem. Here's where we think this could be better. I mean, they're so cool. They're really great to work with. They are really all in on free software and they like KDE and they let us work on stuff that helps the ecosystem for everybody. So it's just a really good deal. And frankly, I wish there were more companies doing this sort of thing. I think in a lot of ways, they're kind of a beacon for how to do it right, and not keeping everything to yourselves. And I won't say giving it away, but like you're already seeing in the industry that despite the fact that everything that they sponsor ends up public, the net result is that other companies nearby want to use the same software. We're seeing this with like the Legion Go S, which just shipped with Steam OS on it, so
right.
On one hand, you could say, well, that's competition. On the other hand, you could say this stuff is so good that eventually everybody concludes that they should just use the same thing, right?
Yeah, and with the Legion Go S, I mean, they're using Steam OS, which means they're also shipping the Steam store. So, like, it's very friendly competition.
Yeah.
Very friendly.
I do.
That's a little bit beyond what I'm involved with, but that's my sense as well.
Yeah. I do remember about a year and a half ago, somewhere around then, sort of trying to read the tea leaves and going, KDE is working on HDR, and the guys at Proton are working on HDR. I wonder if Valve is about to release a Steam Deck with an HDR screen on it.
One wonders, right? Yeah, you can definitely have a lot of fun reading those tea leaves.
Sure.
But the really cool thing is, now that we have HDR, it's public and everybody gets it. And if you have one of those screens, you just benefit for free. And that's the way everything should be. I think. It's super amazing.
The big TV behind me. The big TV behind me. It's an OLED, and it was purchased specifically as a computer monitor for being able to test out the HDR stuff coming to KDE and the kernel. And I've
Nice.
been very excited to be able
Very
to test
cool.
run it.
Very cool. Yeah.
I do have one
And we've got
complaint.
some real wizards working on it.
Oh yeah, I know. Which is why I
Uh-huh.
feel a little like Xavier. I will go to him and complain about stuff, and he's like, "I know, but this is why I chose to do it this way." I really want to be able to turn down the brightness on just SDR content, and I'm still trying to talk him into that.
This, yes. I'm very familiar with this.
Oh,
Yeah.
I think I've had some
To
of that
be
conversation
honest,
in front
I
of you.
don't really
Baron.
understand enough about it to know what's right or wrong. But I know that there are people who feel very passionately about it on both sides.
Oh yes. Yeah, we'll come to agreement eventually on the way that's supposed to work. All right, Rob, I have dominated.
I mean, the
Let's-
interesting thing about this is that when you're talking about HDR, like sort of one of the goals is just make it look prettier, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like some of this is color accuracy, but some of this is just like make it look prettier. And of course, prettier is somewhat subjective. So even just turning it on in the first place is already expressing a subjective preference for how specific way in which you want things to look prettier. We even have, I think, like a color dynamism slider right now that lets you like beef up the saturation for SDR content and stuff. So, I think that there are a lot of perspectives and there's a way to come to some sort of agreement about letting people determine their preferred form of prettiness. But that's probably something that's going to have to be negotiated with the specific people involved.
Yes, I owe myself an upgrade to Fedora 42 and then going and grabbing KDE 6.4, I think is the one that has the latest changes with HDR.
That's the one that's coming out in about 2 weeks.
Right. So
We're still on 6.3 right now.
So it will not be the first time that I have installed KDE from Rawhide in Fedora. This will be like the third or fourth time that my main computer has run latest Fedora and then KDE out of Rawhide. The first time I did it was back with KDE 4 when Fedora shipped like KDE 4.0 and it was terrible because it wasn't ready yet. Like I understand what happened, but there were configuration things that were missing. And it's like, well, I guess we go run it out of Rawhide to get the latest stuff. Fun times.
Yeah, that's a little bit before my time, but I gather there are still a lot of very strong feelings about what happened during that era.
It was a time, man. It was a time.
That's what I hear. But let me tell you, I mean, running Plasma from Gitmaster is absolutely possible. I've actually been running Plasma from Gitmaster on my personal machine 24/7 for 5 years now. It's obviously something that I can do because I'm fairly close to the developers, but we keep really, really, really stable. And if there's ever a problem, it usually gets fixed. Like a big problem that you'll see, it gets fixed within like a couple of days. So I would not think that you'd have any problem running Plasma from Rawhide if you want to do that.
Rob.
So you mentioned earlier about targeting specific user bases. What's a user base that you think really needs to be targeted next, needs for improvements?
I think the next one that needs to be targeted is academics and college professors. These are people who tend to be like gamers and artists. They're sort of thought leaders within their community. They have a lot of influence. Right now, a lot of people are stuck on Windows and Mac, basically just because of Microsoft Office. That's the killer app for them. But everything else can be done very easily with software. And of course, if you have relatively limited usage of this app, of the Office suite, you can also replace that with LibreOffice. And I think there's also Only Office, which is pretty good these days. There's a whole lot of competitors. But in a lot of ways, Microsoft is sort of making this case for us, making it really bad. They're making it like a subscription service, and now they train AI on everything you write. This is sort of a user group that's close to me personally because both of my parents are retired college professors, and both of them are like so close to being fed up enough with the AI nonsense in Microsoft Office to make the switch over to LibreOffice. And once they do that, well, hey, that runs on Linux too, right? But I think it's difficult to overstate how awful a lot of these companies that sell proprietary software are really making their software these days. It's like they're treating the whole world as their playground, and they're running experiments on people to see what they'll accept. And like newsflash, eventually people stop paying you money and buying your product. This seems like kind of a strategic risk to me. Hey, I'm not companies, and I'm going to be perfectly happy if they want to destroy their ability to have customers and earn money. So I think we can make a push for that. Just today, actually, KDE released an initiative called KDE for Windows 10 Exiles, where we are targeting people who can't upgrade to Windows 11 and trying to give them sort of a path forward. But I think that, if we manage to basically target education, that's another big use case there. The big kahuna is like office workers, but that's a really difficult nut to crack because most of these people have systems set up for them by system administrators, and they're reliant on like huge Active Directory systems, and everything needs to be super duper duper locked down. So that's going to be tougher, I think. I'd really like to see us target them eventually, but that's maybe a few years in the future, if you ask me.
Yeah. So when you mentioned the Office suite, you went with LibreOffice and not Calligra.
That's
Calligra
right.
is a KDE project, isn't it?
It is a KDE project. So here I'm unfortunately being a little bit realistic. As much as I would love to say, use Calligra, it's amazing. And in a lot of ways it is amazing, but Calligra was kind of unmaintained for many years. I believe it had its heyday in the past, and then it didn't get a lot of attention until recently when Carl Schwann, a really prolific KDE guy, basically revised it and brought it into the modern era. And now it's running on Qt 6 and it's on FlatHub, so you can easily get it for yourself. And I've used it a bit. Calligra is really good, especially for, I would say, basic use where you don't need to be doing a lot of document interoperability. But whenever I open a document that I created, even just in LibreOffice in Calligra, just doesn't look quite the same. And I know that this is a really difficult topic, and LibreOffice has sunk a ton of resources into compatibility recently that, frankly, I think we didn't have those resources, and so weren't able to do that. And so for that reason, I would love to see us sort of put effort into it and revive it and make it more of a competitor there. But I have to be realistic in the moment and say that, it's going to be LibreOffice or something else.
What does the process look like for one of these KDE apps? Because there's a bunch of KDE apps. Is there a process where you say this app has had its day, but there's nobody working on it, there's nobody looking to work on it, we're gonna retire it? Does that ever happen?
It's fairly informal. There are two ways that this happens. One way that this happens is that the app literally just stops compiling because it's using an old version of Qt that we're not using anymore. So we recently moved to version 6 of the Qt toolkit, which means everything still on 5 is at risk of that happening somewhat soon. So they've got to do that porting to get on 6, or else they will simply be declared unmaintained as a matter of practicality. For things that are not maintained for technical reasons, it's just kind of a judgment call, really. If you look at the Git repo for an app and you see that it hasn't had any substantive commits other than like automatic translation things in, 6 months, a year, you could propose to sysadmins that it gets moved to maintained and contact some of the remaining people there and say, hey, is anybody working on this? Usually, if you don't think anybody's working on it, nobody actually is, and you just won't get a reply. But like a lot of things in KDE, this is just kind of done in a very informal way. We don't wrap it in 12 layers of bureaucracy. You might have heard of the model, early merge, early revert when it comes to software development, which is the idea of like, if you're going to be merging things optimistically, you have to be willing to revert them. We kind of have the same tack here. So we can archive an app if it's clear that nobody's developing it, but then if it comes along 3 weeks later and say, hey, you archived this that I was considering working on, well, we'll just unarchive it. It's like one line in a config file. It's easy stuff. So, we try not to be too bureaucratic about that.
Yeah, makes sense. So, if you started in KDE in 2016, this question really is for before your time. But I'm curious about Trolltech, which is now, well, it was Trolltech, and then it was NVIDIA, and then it was QT, and now I think it's QT Group. There's some interesting history there. What is it like now? Do you guys still work with QT Group closely at all? Or is the paths sort of diverged?
This is probably a better question for somebody else, but I can answer it as best I can because I don't tend to have a huge amount of involvement with the Qt side. But yeah, I mean, we use their toolkit for everything. So we tend to have a fairly close relationship with them. When we find bugs, we will submit them on their bug tracker. Oftentimes we will attempt to fix those bugs ourselves. I mean, I'd say at least not a week goes by when I don't see prominent KDE contributors contributing to Qt as well. I think if you look at the numbers, there is less contribution from KDE relative to everything else simply because the Qt group is now big. So our contributions are now, to a certain extent, dwarfed by the contributions of internal developers and other external developers. We still have a pretty good presence there, and we keep an eye on what they're doing and make sure to voice our opinions when we think that something could be done in a different way or maybe align better with something that we're already doing. And yeah, I would say the relationship is generally pretty good despite all the changes over the years.
Is KDE still being used for like embedded devices? Because I remember at one time, it was. I just saw it. What company was it? Was it Nokia? No, it was one of the other companies. Yeah, it was Nokia. Well, that's an interesting history. From like 2008 to 2011, Nokia had basically they bought Trolltech, and so there was for a while there were some phones. Was it the N900 that was based on Qt and had like some shared roots of KDE? And then I've seen a few experiments over the years where people are doing things like here's KDE running directly on embedded hardware. Do you know, is there any of that that's still around?
It depends on what you mean by embedded. This is a little bit before my time. Again, may not be the right person to be giving you the best answer to this, but I do know that KDE software is currently being shipped on Mercedes electric cars. So that's a certain type of embedded device, but
Yes,
we're in
yes,
there.
it
We've
is.
got KDE in the car right now.
Yeah, very cool. All right, so as you we asked
And of
about
course,
go
the
ahead.
Steam Deck too. Depends on how embedded you feel like that is.
Yeah, the Steam Deck definitely counts. It's not quite the same thing because it's running a full-on display server, but yeah, it's definitely an interesting place to
It
see
is.
it.
It's x86. It's not ARM or custom silicon or something.
Right, right. So as you kind of look forward in KDE, what's the next thing? We talked a little bit about the education space, but like what's the next thing that you want to sort of tackle other than that? Is there anything else that you see?
So what I want to tackle is what I have always wanted to tackle in KDE, which is getting more pre-installation on hardware. I think we're not going to succeed in raising our market share. And when I say our here, I don't necessarily mean KDE. I mean free software in general. I think we're not going to succeed in raising our market share up to like 3 or 4 or 5%, as long as a prerequisite to getting it is that you have to be enough of a nerd and have enough experience and bravery to erase the OS on an existing device and put a new one on there. That's just, there's a ceiling to how many people are going to do that. And I think this is a difficult bridge to navigate because that ceiling inherently keeps us at a fairly small group of technically minded people. So that's our current crowd, right? And that's who we hear from, so we get feedback from, and so we get bug reports from. But if we really want to break into like 10%, 15%, 20%, 30% share, we're going to expand outside of that group. We're going to have to expand into a group of people who just want to buy a device and they don't even care what OS is on it. They may not even think of the idea that there's an OS on it. They just think of the device as the device. That's it. It comes this way. It's got this stuff on it. I bought this. Here's what it is. And so that's one of the reasons why I'm so happy with the Steam Deck, because it is one such device. It's one of the reasons why I'm so happy with the company Tuxedo Computers, because they sell all of their hardware with KDE Plasma on it, like everything. You buy anything from them, you just get Plasma. That's it. So even if you're not a super nerd, if you buy from them, that's what you get. I think we have to double down on all of this because I think that's where the growth potential is. It's where the growth potential is in terms of market share. I also think the growth potential is in terms of allowing software contributors to make a living. Because as I mentioned before, there's money in hardware, right? Like there really isn't so much of a business model these days for selling software that you actually own. Like it's all moved into subscription stuff. I really don't want to do that. But people buy devices. And if you're going to pay a couple hundred or even a couple $1,000s for a device, that's going to make some hardware company a lot of money. And that's a hardware company that's going to be incentivized to have some kind of control over the software that they ship, which means they're going to, at least hopefully, want to sponsor some of the development there. And so I think that's one of the ways that we get more money in free software and we get more money into the hands of people doing the work so that they can make a living doing it and not having to be like starving artists or stealing time from their employers or already retired or independently wealthy, which are not really sustainable, right? Like you can't have build an entire software movement entirely on like the retired, the rich, the students, and like people at easy jobs where nobody notices that they're doing KDE work for half the day. Like you need people who are able to sustain like a family on this stuff and pay the rent and pay their car insurance. And I think there's got to be enough money in the ecosystem, and the way that money exists is through hardware sales. So that's what I want to see more of, and that's what I work towards.
Yeah, I know one of the things that that we've often said on other shows is the lack of OEM deals with Linux. That we need to see more OEM deals. But like you said, some people, they don't care or don't know what they're getting. They just get a computer, don't know what's on it. How, one of the surprises or gotchas some of them might get if they don't know what they're buying and they just buy a Linux laptop with KDE Plasma on it. How, when they like, oh, I need to install this and the directions and the things they find on the internet just aren't working for them. I mean, how would you see addressing these kind of gotchas to the uninitiated?
Super great question, because those are absolutely gotchas. I think that a certain amount of retraining is going to be important here because people bring bad habits with them. And those bad habits aren't going to go away unless you address them front and center. So to a certain extent, I think you can talk about this in the onboarding process. And we have an onboarding process in Plasma right now. When you first install it, it shows a little welcome wizard, and it gives you an overview of some of the ways that you do things and some of the ways that those might be different from how you expect. One, for example, is that there's a whole page on how to install software, because this is one of the prominent differences between platforms, right? And we're pretty clear here. On our platform, open this app right here, and then search for software in this app right here. This is how you get software. And maybe we even need to harden that up a little bit and say, please don't Google it. Don't search for things and then download random binaries off the internet and then drag drop them to random locations. Don't do any of those things because that's going to break everything. We could probably be more forceful about that. But I think onboarding is one thing. Another one's documentation, because in general, people don't read documentation. They don't for basic things, but when they get stuck, that's when they're going to go read documentation. And so you need documentation that's specifically formatted to address these problems. And here I'm going to talk about another KDE-centric OEM, which is Kubuntu. They also ship KDE software with all of their computers, and they've done an absolutely phenomenal job about writing user-centric documentation. If you go on their website, they have like a whole section where you can click on links for specific use cases you might have. So if you're like, how do I play games on Linux? They have a page for games. If you're like, how can I do screen recording on Linux? They have a page for that. How do I do this? How do I do that? How do I do digital art? So they've just got it all there. And I think that kind of very targeted guidance is really important so that people know that they're not on their own, right? They don't need to just Google stuff, which is a total wasteland, by the way, anyway, of course. Like, you can't Google anything now because it's just AI nonsense, either from the search engine or because the top links are all LLM generated garbage that doesn't have any information in it. So like, this is becoming increasingly frustrating for everybody, but that of course means that we have an opportunity to thrive and shine here by providing human generated content that's actually targeted and relevant. So those would be some of my big answers to that questions. Essentially, we have to take responsibility for communicating to these new users that it's different. And it's hopefully going to be different in a good way, but here are the specific ways that you do these things that you might be already accustomed to doing in a different way. And I think people can learn if you communicate in a humane way. And those who can't learn, well, those are probably the people who struggle to install software on Windows and especially Mac OS too. I don't know how much you guys are familiar with Macs, but like, it's impossible to install software on a Mac. Yeah. Nobody can figure it out. And it's been this way for like 30 years. Nobody knows what you drag where, what you click where, what you put where. It's a complete nightmare. So the idea that like we're worse than the competition, especially if the competition is Mac OS, I think is not really true.
No, I think you're right. As you're going through that, I got to think is like, well, Chromebooks have become fairly popular these days, which I mean, it's Linux obviously underneath, but that also, it's popular and people figure it out and get by. and then Mac OS too. Yeah. It's a little more popular. I mean, lots of times when you go Google something, here's for Mac, here's for Windows. But yeah, it's definitely, I have a Mac at work and, I'm like, how do I uninstall this thing now? I don't want this anymore.
Yeah. It's challenging.
Is this an app do you remember drag to the trash? Or is this installed via the bundle installer? How do I uninstall that? You don't, actually.
That's
you
worse.
don't
That's
uninstall anything that was installed via the bundle installer.
Yeah. Nate, do you remember when Windows XP died and the netbooks started getting pre-installed with Linux? Are we sort of at that? Are we at that point in history once again? Is history repeating itself with Windows 10 going away?
I feel like it's going to be a better point though, because the thing about netbooks is like it was crappy hardware. And the software was not really very well optimized for onboarding. And I feel like both of those were doing a better job today. So I definitely do feel like if I rub that crystal ball again, that I see the winds shifting and we're going to start getting more pre-installs here. I think it is going to start happening. And when it does happen, we have to be ready. This is another thing that I believe really strongly is that when institutions, companies, and people go shopping, you have to have a ready product. It can't look like a garage science project. You have to have answers to all the questions, right? Because eventually this is going to happen, right? Some institution, some company is going to say, we're looking for something better. What's out there? And eventually they'll find KDE and they'll look at what we've got to offer and they'll say, okay, does it look good? Yes. Is it easy to install? We're maybe still working on that one. Is it stable? Pretty good, could be better. Is it reliable? Pretty good, could be better. Is it powerful? Yes. Does it meet our needs? Can we adapt it to what we want to do? Yes. So like you heard me answer some of those questions with my own answers. We have to have yes as the answer to every single one because that's the one that wins. When institutions especially go shopping, they have like a bullet point list of the things that they want. And the one that meets the most bullet points is the one that wins. So we've got to be ready. So it means that we have to keep everything in a state of perpetual readiness constantly. It's the only thing that works.
So Tech Paladin isn't working with Valve on a Steam book when Windows 10 is gone?
No comment. I'm afraid I can't talk about anything about Valve's future plans. Not that it's likely that I even know them anyway, because we are just an external contractor at this point in time. I mean, we know some of the stuff, but I don't know. There's probably tons of cool stuff happening inside. And if you're next going to ask me if I know when Half-Life 3 is coming out, that one I also, I'm afraid, don't have an answer for.
No, let's see. What's the lawyer speak for this? We are not able to make any future-looking comments at this time.
Something like that. That sounds exceptionally lawyery.
Yeah, yeah. It's interesting. We talk about this with the OEMs. There are some. So you've got, in fact, I do this show off of an HP Dev 1, which came shipped with Pop! OS, and that was their collab with System 76. You have System 76 out there shipping, Pop! OS, which for now is GNOME and is about to be Cosmic Desktop. But it's fairly easy to put KDE on one of those if you want to. You do have places like Framework that has an option to tick for please don't install Windows for me. Like there are beginning to be some options, and it would be really interesting to see even more of those. Maybe we can talk Framework into shipping a Fedora KDE version of the OS instead of Windows on some of their laptops, or I think there is very much possibility.
I think they need to pass along
It's definitely been something that a lot of people I know of have thought about and want to see. There are a lot of, I'd say, fingers in that pie right now trying to get it to happen. And others too. I mean, if you look at, for example, Lenovo right now does ship some of their laptops with Fedora as a preload option. It's not all of it, it's like a couple of them. And now that KDE has come to co-equal status with GNOME, I hope that it will actually become easier to get that as an option there, and that it's demoted to be just a spin anymore.
Have you been watching System 76 and the Cosmic Desktop?
Yeah, I have been. I've been taking a look at what they're doing. In a lot of ways, it's pretty impressive what they've been able to accomplish. And I think this also illustrates my idea that like hardware is where the money is, because this is a huge engineering effort and they've been funding this off of hardware sales. If I imagine like, what if KDE was selling hardware? Like, think of the money we'd have internally to be able to do this sort of thing and begging for donations. But yeah, Cosmic is a pretty impressive effort. We're actually talking with them on a bunch of things because unlike GNOME, they're very interested in following XDG specs. So they like icon theming and they are okay with custom styling. So we've been talking with them to see if there's any way that we can essentially interoperate so that they can piggyback on what we've done and our stuff will not look like complete butt on Cosmic. So it's been pretty good there, but I would be lying if I didn't say that they didn't just decide to take KDE and put it on there, because I think a lot of what they were looking for is what we already offer. But that was their decision, and that's their right, and they have definitely made something really cool. And maybe in the future, if it becomes too much engineering effort, they will go to us and we'll say, we still love you. We're happy to have you. And you can tweak our stuff to your heart's content.
Well, I think if nothing else, it'll be useful to have another desktop to bash some sense into the guys that manage the Wayland protocol.
Yeah, that's a very good point. It's an oft underappreciated point, which is that if you have a compositor, you have a seat at the governance table of Wayland protocols. And so the more people who have compositors whose representatives are like nice, cool, sensible people, the easier Wayland protocol development becomes, basically. So that's something that's, I think, not often well understood, but it's totally the way the process works.
That has been an interesting sort of procedure, trying to get KDE stuff into Wayland, hasn't it?
We've had a lot of success recently, honestly. I mean, many of the latest protocols have been driven by us.
Yes. Okay, so I have a little bit of a conspiracy theory, and you probably will not want to answer, but I'm going to go ahead and tell you.
Okay.
At the time when the Wayland guys came out and said, basically, we need to do a better job at this. We're terrible, and we're going to do better. And they ended up banning a guy for a while that was really being part of the problem. My theory was that someone from Valve came to them privately and said, we're just going to fork Wayland if you guys don't play ball. He didn't say no.
I mean, there was a public effort to actually do that. I mean, it's hard for me to say no because there was, in fact, a public effort. You might remember Frog protocols.
I do.
I mean, there was some public stuff that went on.
Yep.
I'm not really involved in Wayland Protocol governance itself, so I actually don't know the details. Remember when this guy got banned for a little while.
Yeah.
But I definitely think there was a lot of drama behind the scenes when it came to dissatisfaction with how Wayland Protocol development was happening.
Yeah. But it's better now. We fixed it. We're doing better.
Yeah, it's a lot better. Things do seem to be better. And now, in many ways, KDE is at least sharing driver's seat because we've been able to get a lot of protocols in recently. Mm-hmm. There aren't many left. I mean, really, the two big ones are like session restore and picture-in-picture. Once we've got session restore and picture-in-picture, that's like most of what's left for full feature parity with what people expect on X11.
Yeah.
There are a couple other things. There's always more you can do, right? But like those are the big ones that we still get daily complaints about.
Both of those are fairly, well, I guess session restore is more than just Chrome, but picture-in-picture is going to be a very browser-ish thing, isn't it? Like I imagine that both of those are things that that big company that owns the browser has been pushing for.
Yeah, I think they're going to be interested too. I mean, this is also a place where I don't have enough experience, and you might want to honestly invite like Xaver or David on and ask them some of these questions because they're much more involved with Wayland protocol development.
Yeah.
But I know that it is a topic of interest to them to the extent that they care about our tiny little slice of the market.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah, so I want to pivot a little bit and ask you about running the business, running Paladin Tech. Like what has that experience been like? Started spinning up a business. Is a U.S. company, and what is the kind of what is your
It's a U.S. company, yeah.
Yeah, what are you seeing running that? Like the people you work with, do they get it? Have you had problems trying to do open source as a business?
It's been quite a journey, but in some ways, I was kind of doing this on easy mode because I was pretty much inheriting a pre-existing team and a pre-existing contract. So those were the things that were like fixed, and I just needed to build a new structure around it. There was a lot of discussion internally about how we're going to do this and how we're going to play this and what the structure is going to be and how decision making is going to be done and who owns what and all that stuff. And eventually we managed to come to an agreement, and the company is run pretty transparently inside. The legal structure is that of a partnership, and so it's like a sole proprietorship owned by one benevolent dictator for life. It's a partnership, and that means it has more than one owner, and we make decisions pretty much collectively inside. My wife likes to joke that this is a company whose only assets are like the giant brains of a bunch of people. So to me, it doesn't make sense to run a company like this in a really top-down manner. Right. I mean, the people generating the value are all really intelligent and awesome people who want to feel like they're consulted. They've got skin in the game and they've got decision-making capacity. So that's what we do. And I feel like that's the way to keep everybody happy and productive anyway. So we're running it like that. In terms of the nuts and bolts, there's been a lot of stuff to learn, a lot of business stuff, a lot of legal stuff, a lot of financial stuff, a lot of accounting stuff. And I've kind of taken the lead on this because one of my maybe ordinarily questionably useful abilities is like the ability to read long legalese and not fall asleep. So I've read a lot of very boring text over the past couple of months and written a lot of notes for myself and others about how all of this very boring stuff actually works. But yeah, you know, on a day-to-day basis, a lot of the company kind of runs itself. And there are periodic things that I've got to take care of and that other people have to do. But I would say by far the hardest part of this enterprise was setting it up. Actually running it now that it's off the ground is a lot smoother.
Yeah. To talk shop for just a second, going with the partnership, the multiple member LLC. is definitely the simplest way to get started. I hope you've come across the idea of self-employment tax, and that you're all going to owe a whole bundle of that at the end of the year.
Oh, of course.
Okay.
I mean, it's not at the end of the year. You do it on a quarterly basis. So the interesting thing about that particular one is that I was already familiar with that because I was working for Blue Systems as an independent contractor. So I've been playing that game for a long time. The one thing that has changed with regards to this is that if you are self-employed in the USA as a sole proprietorship, you get the qualified business income deduction, which is 20% of business income, right? You've probably heard of that one. So that goes away if you're a partner in a partnership. It's just, you don't qualify for it anymore. Great. So there's just a million tiny little things like that. Why is that there? I don't know. Who put it there? Who knows? Does it make sense? Doesn't matter. You have to go with it. So you just got to know all that stuff.
I warn you about the self-employment income because I too am self-employed, and I got to write the IRS a large check at the end of my first really profitable year, and it is now one of my missions to help other people avoid that particular pain. Yeah,
for sure. There are lots of deductions. There are many clever ways that you can structure things legally to avoid this. I mean, if you are paying self-employment tax, I very much hope you have a solo 401k you can put lots and lots of money into. Solo 401k is a really great way to complete, not only legally, but like morally shelter money from taxes, because they want you to do this. Like they set it for this exact purpose. So you could put like something like $1,000 a year into a solo 401k. And the only cost really is annoying paperwork. But yeah, there's all sorts of stuff you can do.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I'm just curious, is there kind of room here that if someone that is not Valve wanted to say, come to you guys and say, hey, it would be really great if KDE does this, and we have a bundle of money we can put into it. Is that something that's on the table?
Absolutely. We're not only is it on the table, it's something that we are actively set up for and seeking out right now. It's an important thing because, as you can probably imagine, a company with one big contract is not super duper duper stable.
Right.
So, you know, that goes away, company vanishes, right? So assuming we don't want that to happen, we're actively looking to get more so that we can be sort of more of a, I won't use the R word, say a real company. But okay, fine, I will. More of a real company.
Yeah.
So yes, this is something that we're set up for, and we already do it. We've been doing it effectively for 5 or 6 or 7 or so years now. So if anybody's very interested in sponsoring work on KDE stuff, we've got some of the best KDE hackers on the payroll.
Yeah. Does this scale all the way down to like bug bounties? Like if I said this one thing really irritates me, I could throw $100 at the bounty. Is that the sort of thing you guys would take a look at too?
Well, I'm not sure $100 would really do it. But,
well, so I mean, the idea of bug bounties, you have one guy that gives 100, and a second guy that gives $100, and another guy chips in 50, and so eventually you're talking about real money.
For sure, eventually, yeah. We're not set up for that right now because doing a bug bounty in that way inherently involves some kind of an escrow arrangement, which is a very financially complicated system. Either that or it's like the honor system where everybody just promises to pay once it's done, which, is a thing. And we've seen that a little bit, but especially when you're talking about bounties that get up into thousands of dollars, it's a little bit hairy, but for sure. I mean, we're up for targeted bug fix work. Absolutely.
So somebody could start a GoFundMe or whatever and get all the money built up and just pay all at once. Then probably be a better way.
Yep.
Yeah, it definitely work. It's kind of funny. I've seen several of these companies doing bug bounties, like come on the scene, become the solution, and then stop paying bug bounties out and eventually go out of business. It's happened. It's happened several times now. You would think it would be a real stable business.
It's a bit of an ill omen, isn't it?
Yes.
It makes you wonder what the problem is.
Yes, exactly. All right. We're basically at the end of our time. And here's where I get to ask you a real tough question.
Oh, wow. Already.
Yeah, I know. It goes fast. It always does. Real tough question for you, though, because you have to do set math. And that is there anything we didn't ask you about that you wanted to tell folks about? And it's hard because you have to think through all the things you wanted to ask.
Well, I'm pretty sure Like I mentioned in the email when we were just corresponding, I can probably natter on for ages and ages and ages. I just kind of like talking about KDE and free software stuff. So I don't think there was actually anything in particular we missed. We covered a lot of ground, but I'm pretty happy where we ended up.
Yeah, excellent. All right, I've got to ask you two final questions before we let you go, and that is your favorite text editor and system scripting language.
Well, my text editor, of course, is KDE's Kate, which I use exclusively for everything, not only for programming, but also just for text files and notes and stuff. Scripting language, I don't do a ton of scripting anymore, but when I do, I usually just write little bash scripts. I have tons and tons and tons of bash aliases and functions in my bash RC that I use for daily navigation in the shell. For anything more complicated, I use Python, but I don't tend to actually do that much that requires more than what bash can do. And by the time I start to think, okay, this requires Python, I'm thinking, wait a minute, am I doing the right thing here? Like, should this be something else entirely and not like a big giant custom Python script? Maybe it should just be an app instead.
Yep. Definitely a worthwhile question to ask. All right. Thank you so much, man, for being here. It's been a lot of fun getting to chat, pick your brain about KDE and some of the stuff going on. We appreciate it.
Yeah, you're welcome. It was a lot of fun. I actually have one question to ask, which is, Rob, have I converted you yet?
Oh.
Well, I'm definitely going to give it another shot one of these days.
All right, that's a good start. So you're now KDE curious.
Yeah. Now I'm thinking of all the other questions I wanted to ask you, but we are out of time. We'll get it next time. We'll have you back here in a few months, and I can ask the other questions. So
just have to do it again.
All right, sounds good. Appreciate it, man. We'll see you next time.
Well, thanks so much. I appreciate it. It was great.
All right. Okay, Rob. We haven't converted you yet, but what do you think?
I mean, it's not that I've ever been converted away. It's just like I said, I'm just giving GNOME a chance. And I mean, I've been there, I don't know.
Give GNOME a chance.
It seems like a couple of years. So it's time I come back and see what, I have not even really dug into Plasma 6 yet since that's come out. So, my experience is still stuck in Plasma 5. So it's really time for me to come back and see what I can do with it.
Yeah. Well, I will tell you, I've been enjoying it. The water over here is pretty nice. It works pretty well, and it's not like Windows anymore. It doesn't look that much like, especially with Windows 11, it doesn't look like that much at all. But
I hear you other folks talking about all the great times you have with it.
Oh yeah. All right, Rob, you have anything you want to plug while you're here?
Whenever I'm on here, just plug the usual. You guys can come catch more of me at the Untitled Linux show, me and Jonathan and a few other guys. Or you can come connect directly with me by finding my website at robertpcampbell.com. And on there's links to my LinkedIn, Twitter, Blue Sky, Mastodon, stuff like that.
Yep. Excellent. Appreciate you being here. All right. If you want to find more of me, there's, of course, Hackaday. That is where the security column goes live Friday mornings. And then there is ULS, the Untitled Linux show, over at twit.tv, twit.tv/ULS. You guys should check that out as well. We have about 3 weeks unscheduled. And so if you run a project or know somebody that does, let us know, and we can get that scheduled and get you on the show. And then we have Benny Vasquez coming back from Alma Linux on July 1st. So looking forward to that. That's always a treat to talk to her. Other than that, we appreciate everybody that watches and listens. Thank you for being here, whether it's live or on the download. And we will see you next time on the FLOSS Weekly.